Thanks very much, Nuala. It's brilliant to be back at Ireland's Edge again. I have to say, when I first came here, the very first Ireland's Edge, I didn't think that 4 years later I'd be standing here with Ye Vagabonds opening for me, which I'm sure is probably how they thought of their gig this afternoon. But it's brilliant to be back home in Kerry and to be joined by 4 such interesting guests this afternoon to talk about cultural expectations and the way that we think about culture and the way that at events like this we maybe sit in the audience and have a wonderful time and sing along and everything, and the immense amount of effort and thought and choices and decisions and thinking that have gone into putting those things together, putting the right people together to make connections and to build relationships, to make these things make the kind of natural seeming sense that they do when you see something up on stage. That's all been going on behind the scenes with people like the 4 people who are joining me here today, who Nuala just introduced you. So I'm actually going to start off just by talking to each of them about the very interesting work that they do in the places that they work. And I'm going to start with you, Ray, because Other Voices, of course, is on this weekend here in Dingle, and Other Voices was in Belfast over the summer this year and 2 years ago as well, at the Duncairn Arts Centre, of which you are the director. And I just wonder if you might share with the audience the story of the Duncairn, because it is an extraordinary story of a venue and a project that might surprise many people.
I think that, first of all, I should inform people that it's located in an area of North Belfast, which for 30 years was neglected in terms of investment into the arts. People would sporadically come in, provide a project, and then you'd never see them again. There was no sustainable arts investment. Also, it's housed in what is a former Presbyterian church in a 100% nationalist area of North Belfast. It grew out of an organisation called the 174 Trust, which was a Christian organisation. And in fact, my boss, the director of the 174 Trust, is a guy called the Reverend Bill Shaw, who is a Presbyterian minister. But Bill and I met. I'd worked with festivals and really through the Irish language and Irish cultural promotion in South Belfast, and then through the Sculpture for Grafton in North Belfast, which was the North's biggest Irish language festival. But Bill started to attend some of these events and approached me about his dream for converting this former Presbyterian church into a facility that could become the first, and as far as we're aware, the only shared art space that is not in the neutral part of Belfast city centre. So the challenge was to establish a shared space which could start to bring people together and help to let them understand that people in communities have much more in common. They have the same challenges, the same difficulties, and it was about establishing a common ground. So in 2014, after 11 years of groundwork by the Trust and especially Bill, the centre opened after an almost £4 million investment. And I'm here to blow our own trumpet, but we've broken down all sorts of barriers, established a fantastic reputation, which not only travels throughout Belfast, but far beyond, right across this island. And I mean, friends of ours like Leisha and Ye Vagabonds are regular visitors to the centre, and it really has changed the dynamic and I suppose the optimism throughout the city, because what we're trying to do is to bring this new sense of hope and push for change, especially within the emerging young generation, which I find absolutely stimulating and inspiring.
So, I mean, obviously, when Other Voices was on, you presumably had visitors coming from all over the island, but at the same time, people who might visit from very far away are perhaps travelling less of an emotional distance than people who might be visiting the Duncairn from more nearby, in the sense that for people from different backgrounds attending, say, a traditional music gig in a former Presbyterian church in a nationalist area of Belfast has all sorts of layers of significance. How do you find, how do audiences and prospective audiences deal with those kind of, like, how that confounds their expectations of a city that traditionally you might not have chosen to go to that type of an event in another part.
It's something like, I mean, more than anything, I'm extremely proud to be from my city. I love the city. It's good, it's bad, but I love its people. And it's, you know, some may call it radical, revolutionary spirit. And it has had a rich impact. And indeed, like the Harpers Festival of 1792 was one of the most momentous musical gatherings and for recording the music. So it has had this, but through the lack of investment, through the lack of promotion, our artists weren't getting this work out there. So it was like a deep land passion of mine to showcase this, to show the talent that we had. Like, I mean, we have phenomenal, especially in the area of traditional music. We have, Belfast was going through an identity crisis, and this is something that I think, you know, a lot of cities and a lot of communities can sit down and really have a look at. You know, it was looking outwardly all the time to try and replicate what other cities were doing. Well, really, what we wanted to do was touch the authentic heartbeat of what made our city great. So in the field of traditional music, we probably had more world-class performers than any other genre of music within the city, but they weren't getting the promotion, they weren't getting the stage or the opportunity to showcase this. So we set about trying to write that. And one interesting occurrence that happened was we had the ambassador from Norway who was actually over for a football match. Norway were playing up at Windsor Park, and he was a great fan of classical music and had went into the local tourist board to ask, you know, were there any, and the Ulster Orchestra were playing in the Ulster Hall, but then someone recommended him that if he'd like to see the real Belfast and get a taste and the essence of what the creative people in the city were doing, that he should come and visit us. And I think he gave us a 5-star review and promised to come back again. You know, so look, there's fantastic talent in the city. There's amazing young talent coming through, and we feel that we're a catalyst to help these young people to go on to get the recognition and sustainable careers that they deserve.
Now, Nora, you work in a very different type of city to Belfast, in a different context as director of the Irish Cultural Centre there. But I wonder what you feel about what Ray said about the differences between looking outwards and looking inwards in terms of the creative direction of artists. You present Irish culture to a city that is long regarded as one of the cultural centres of the world. How do you address doing something like that in a way that would be very different to, say, if you were working as a creative director somewhere in Ireland where you have a very different type of audience?
I know Duncairn Arts Centre well. I've been there many times and had great nights there. And actually, it's curious that our music programs are quite similar. We're both interested in, well, I mean, we've wide variety of genres in the Centre Culturel Irlandais. But when it comes to traditional Irish music, it's music that really pushes the boundaries, where you've people like Lee Vagabonds, you know, where there's something really special there, and they have new interpretations of, you know, familiar tunes. And also interesting that, you know, in Duncairn you're presenting work in a what was a church, and a lot of the music we present in the Centre Culturel Irlandais is also in a chapel. In fact, I call it our Other Voices series, our chapel sessions, because you have that. It's not many art centres that have their own chapel. So we make the most of ours. We have a chaplain who lives on site, but is very generous in allowing us to present music in the chapel. So we have what we call our chapel sessions, and so we, in terms of presenting music to a Parisian audience, a French or an international audience, when certainly doesn't want to present what it is they sometimes want or expect. So it's always, I mean, one's role is also to challenge, and you don't want to confirm stereotypes that exist. And I think it's also just about being very open. And what interests me greatly is to reflect also the city of Paris, which is so international. So quite often we'll have artistic collaborations. We'll work with other centres. So, for example, the Centre Culturel Hellénique, the Greek centre, we presented a concert last year as part of the Jazzy Colours Festival, which takes place in November. So for the month of November, you have jazz presented by all of the centres, the Centre Culturel from other countries. And the idea behind the festival is that the Irish Centre presents work in, for example, actually it's tomorrow night, we'll be presenting 2 bands in the Hungarian Institute. So there's this kind of cross-fertilization and sharing, and it's about also introducing maybe Hungarian audiences who are used to the Hungarian Centre to Irish jazz musicians. And we also welcome musicians from other countries, so from Estonia, from Luxembourg, from all over. But what interests me most is the kind of collaborations, the exciting collaborations that can take place. So with the Greek Institute, it was actually an Italian musician based in Ireland performing with a Greek singer in the German Institute. So that's so that, and
Quite
to me that was
mix,
really,
yeah.
That was a real success.
And you work with the international organisation of all the various cultural missions of different countries in Paris. I think there are 57, is it?
57, yeah.
57
Colombia just
missions.
joined.
Like in
so
terms of
we're now
working
57.
with all of those different organisations who are all trying to present their culture to audiences in Paris and present themselves to the world. How does that make you think about, like, either, I suppose it's a responsibility, but also a privilege in terms of putting kind of a face on Ireland to the Parisian cultural scene? Like, does that, you said it's important not just to be positive, that you have to be critical as well. How do you deal with that kind of responsibility, not to just sort of cheerlead for Ireland, because, that might be what you might be expected to do by some people, but at the same time, you want to present a vibrant Irish culture that is, like, by its definition, never just going to be purely positive and, greenwashed or whatever.
Well, we present work made by Irish artists, and so it reflects what is being made in Ireland, which is not always positive. It's not always a rosy, rose-tinted version of Ireland. And I think it's very important even to be taken seriously by our French colleagues, that we are not a propagandistic tool. Although we work very closely with the Irish Embassy in Paris, we both recognise that the Centre Culturel is an independent organisation which receives funding from the Irish state, from Culture Ireland and Department of Foreign Affairs, but there is that independence. And looking at, say, the 57 cultural centres from around the world, they're not all, they don't all operate in the same way. So you've some that are very closely linked to the state. And there are others, like our neighbours, the Finnish Institute, where again it's independent. So it's I think one of the things that's important to note is how they're perceived by French cultural programmers. So that independence is essential.
Yeah, and that independence, I mean, there's something very interesting about what both you and Ray have said about expectations, and about how part of presenting interesting cultural programs is about confounding and challenging people's expectations so that they don't just get what they expect. And I wonder if I could turn to you, Leisha, because I should have welcomed onto the panel as well your harp.
Absolutely.
The harp is an integral part.
Panelist, yeah.
Leisha was recently named Gradam Ceol TG Cahir Musician of the Year. And there's a great quote from her in the paper when she was asked for her. There's a great quote from her in the paper when she was asked for her reaction, and she said, "I'm just so happy for the harp." So I think the harp deserves its place on the panel as well. And that issue of expectations is something that I wonder whether you face in your work as an artist, but also you are involved in the kind of cultural programming with festivals
Absolutely.
that Ray and Nora have done. Like, what kind of expectations do people have when they see someone arrive with a very recognisable and unusual looking instrument, but one that is also instantly recognisable as the national symbol of Ireland, that is on our coinage, is on our official documents, is on everything? Like, how do you deal with audience who have baggage as soon as you?
I suppose, obviously, my whole life I've been used to that kind of expectation, and ever since I was 12 when I got my harp first, I refused to wear a skirt, which is where we started off way back. I would have come in the end of the era of lovely Mary O'Hara, who sang with the harp and sat with her, to the side, was ladylike, and and I couldn't relate to that world at all, and I just was dying to. I didn't know what I wanted, but I was dying to just be able to play like my counterparts and fiddles and accordions, or even what I was doing on the piano, we'll say, or something like that. And then that grew on to being part of trad, and just to find it, like, harp is down the bottom in the trad world. It's not respected the same way, and I suppose that's part of my fight for years, but that's why I was saying I'm so happy for the harp, because it really is genuinely recognition for something that we see every day but don't respect it the same way, especially from the boys at the top who are not respecting it. We won't go into my headline.
Well, we can go into your headline. What was the headline? You can tell us what the headline said that you...
I didn't mean it to have to be a headline, by the way. To take the harp off the tax envelope, because everybody... Well, I know this is...
What could give something a worse name in Ireland than being on a tax envelope?
Because everybody gets the envelope, everybody sees the harp and says
Immediate
the
shock.
four-letter word. And it's just reinforcing this absolutely negative thing with this beautiful symbol. It's a symbol for a reason. I'm very proud to be part of the harping tradition, which is pre-Christian. It's so old in this country, and we are the kings of it across the world. We really have a lot to shout about. And then to see it kind of disrespected in this way really obviously gets on my nerves, so I, any opportunity I can to... but, it's been the symbol since 1270, and it wasn't us that made the harp the symbol of Ireland. It was others who looked at us. So, in fact, it was the Crown who put that on us. Whether we're grateful for that or not, I don't know. But we're known as the music country, and specifically because of the harp. And whenever I travel a lot, everybody looks and goes, wow, you're from Ireland. That's so cool. And because of the music. And it's not just in festival circuits and music. It's further out, because I'm fortunate to have certain gigs like that. You might go with the embassy in certain countries and that, and you can see it at higher levels. They will respect us because of our culture, and it doesn't see. I see that that's not reflected, say, by our own government here, because if you're going to disrespect the symbol, surely you can give us a couple of us a gig. There's like tons and tons and tons of fantastic harpers, absolutely.
So do you feel that the expectations that can come with that, like, for example, you were saying about playing in embassies, like if you are invited to go and play in an embassy with the harp and so on, do you think that there can be an expectation that you are going to show up in a skirt and play the lovely harp music that might be expected, rather than showing up and doing something that is vibrant and different and is your interpretation of your instrument?
Yeah, there are expectations, but usually the music speaks for itself, hopefully.
And they can take it or leave it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've had situations where definitely the ambassador mightn't. She was expecting a harpist, a proper, with the girl with the goon I liked, but don't worry, I do fix up for those gigs. No, those opportunities are really amazing, and I would always have the height of respect for them, because I'm representing my country, and I often think, the way we treat our, say, sportsmen in the country with such high respect and such great time on the telly, that I would love for us to have more respect for us that go out into the world representing the country, and,
Absolutely. I think that something that I find really interesting about that is that all of you as artists and as creative directors have to think about the way that you interact and work interacts with audiences, and how audiences' preconceptions or expectations make it difficult to predict how people are going to react to what they see on stage or what music they hear and so on. If I could turn to you, Sophie, like, you have a very interesting journey from coming over to Ireland to work in theatre to going back to Shropshire, where you came from, and you now work in rural theatre, where one might expect like the audience expectations are going to be very different to the audiences that you found when you were working in theatre in Dublin. And especially because Pentabus is a touring theatre company, you find all sorts of different audiences and all sorts of different spaces. Like, how do you deal with the kind of expectations that people might come to the work that you put on?
That's a really interesting question, because I can't control my audience anymore. I run a company called Pentabus that's based in just outside a tiny little rural town in the Marches, which is right on the English-Welsh border. And I'm sort of a steward of the organisation and a steward of the work and a steward of the audiences, because we make theatre in community spaces. So the ethos behind Pentabus is, why should you have to go to a city to see a brilliant piece of work, of performance, when you could go see it in your local parish hall, community centre, village hall? And in that sense, the spaces that the work is presented in, I have no control over, because they are they're run by somebody within the community. They are run by the audience are controlled by somebody within that community. I mean, we're sort of ninjas in that the company will turn up at 2:00 in the afternoon with a van, transform a community space which is not theirs, which they have been invited into a space where theatre is presented. The community will then come and the show will happen. There always has to be an interval, which is not so contemporary theatre, because there's a raffle. There's always a raffle. That's how you make your money.
These are my kind of events.
Yeah, and I mean, the worst is actually when one of the actors who've always bought raffle tickets win the raffle, and they have to come out in their costume and say, "Great, thanks very much, I'll have the booze." But it's a real privilege, because we are invited into these spaces, and it's completely different to making work in a black box studio space in a city, because you do have a lot more control. You have a marketing plan. We just send posters to the village hall promoter or parish hall promoter or community centre promoter with the date and the time, and call Nora on this number or email for a ticket. So we don't know how many people are going to turn up. They might ring us and say, "Could you do a bit of Facebook advertising for us?" Because we don't know how many people are going to turn up. And you have to be reactive. So it's a really different way of making theatre. I suppose also for me, as a first-time artistic director, it's a great way to play without anybody noticing. But I think it means you have more responsibility, because that space that you're invited to, it may be one of the 2 times that year that they have any kind of performance being presented. And 15% of the performances we do are in communities that are in the kind of top 10 to 20 in the indices of multiple deprivation. So they're places that may never have had live performance. And the audience may well be an audience who've never seen a play before, or who've never seen a piece of theatre. So you have to try and create something which is accessible to all audiences. Sometimes as an artist, that means that you have to be aware of the challenges of that. But like, the top of my handover list from my predecessor was, don't say bleep in village halls. We will never return to Morton-on-Say. You can't, when you're commissioning artists to make work, you have to say, lads, you can't swear in your act of writing a piece of theatre, which is hard to do, actually, for contemporary artists.
Somewhat given to rural Ireland, perhaps.
That's it. Absolutely. Like, rural communities, this is amazing, because we're in a rural community that is full of culture, and that's astonishing. But some of the communities that Pentabus goes into, and this is something I was thinking about, they are not beautiful. They are rural areas that have hardship, that might have generations of people who have not worked, but people who have not left. And there is not beauty in the way that that somewhere like this has. And there's a little question about, does culture exist in the same way in areas that are not beautiful, that do not have that access to tourism? But going back, you got to consider the audience, and that's something that I've learned massively.
There's something we've been talking a lot today about edges and places on the edge. And I guess rural England, in some ways, is another edge place. Maybe not, we don't think about it in the same way as we think about ourselves, but at the same time, England is a country riven by a lot of cultural divides, many of which do focus on the urban-rural or the provincial-metropolitan and so on. I mean, you spent a long time, you moved away from Shropshire to come to Ireland, and you were here and you were in the Netherlands and so on. Going back to the place that you originally came from, that is a sort of an edge place, a rural place, a place that wouldn't be on the radar of a lot of the kind of cultural world that you had been living in. How has that made you think about yourself as an artist, but also about the importance of culture and what your responsibility as an artist or an artistic director is?
It's really edgy right now because of what's going on politically. And that's made me massively think, because you're not existing in a bubble. As an artist, often when you're making work in an urban context, you are existing in more of a social bubble and a political bubble, and you're able to have conversations with people who feel the same as you. When I started 2 years ago, I got the job like 4 months after the Brexit vote, and was a little bit like, should I have applied for that? I'm living in Ireland, I've got a career in Ireland, it's in Europe. But actually, I felt like I also had a responsibility to go back and listen. Like, I live in a really rural community. They are like very much small C and big C conservative, largely, and I made it my business to have a conversation with and listen to somebody who had completely different political opinions from myself every week. And I have continued to do that. On top of that, I've set myself a challenge to try and engage as many people in cultural activity that have not engaged in cultural activity before. And I think as an artist, that's difficult sometimes, because you want to just have a conversation with somebody about something that you care about. And you end up often having to translate yourself and what you do. But it also gives you this brilliant objective view on how people who do not engage with culture view artists. And you do have to turn around and say, well, actually, you have a right. Like, it's in the Declaration of Human Rights that every human has access to culture. And by presenting theatre in your community space, that is giving you access to culture. And that's your fundamental human right.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily connected to going away and coming back. And I don't know if I'll stay there forever. Like, I left where I grew up because there was no culture or access to culture, and I moved to Ireland where I found a sense of culture, and I've moved back to maybe try and change that a little bit. But it still feels like there's a job for us to do as artists eternally, connecting people.
And all four of you in some ways are living in places that are edges in different ways. I mean, Ray, what Sophie just said there about having a conversation every day with people with different political opinions to yourself must be quite difficult. You know, you live in Belfast.
In Belfast, as soon as you're let out of the hospital, that begins.
Yeah. And where everything from
we maybe have a bit more expertise in that realm than most, but certainly it's about challenging differences, as I've said earlier. And one of the first, and I would say one of the most. There were two projects that we came up with. One was a thing that we called the Super Sunday Big Breakfast Session. What we would do, this is a free community event, and whoever would be headlining in the centre on this Saturday evening, we would ask them to play for the community. And where we are, like £5 will make the difference between a child going to school without a meal. So all our concerts are bring your own bottle. We don't charge bar prices, so people are brought in. But it's about what we decided to do, try and educate people, first of all, to appreciate the music and the talent that was coming to perform for them, and also make it as accessible and as affordable as possible. And as well as having this discounted and price-aware policy, that for those that were even further beyond in terms of poverty, there's no other word for it, that they could have access as well. So the Sunday sessions were phenomenal. We would provide newspapers, people would come. It was about trying to re-knit the fabric and the threads of community that had been ripped apart by government cuts and just modern day living. So those events really put us on the map, and what really happened was people started to hear about this, and they were coming from different communities, and we seen we're onto something here. And we started to do them then on once a month. The first one, I remember, and I'd had this idea for about 6 years, never had the proper venue to do it. But I remember not being able to sleep the night before, going, I'll put this together. I hope people come out and support it. My wife said to me, well, what would, I suppose, mark a good start? And I said, we get 40 to 60 people. With 370 people turned up. The kitchen, the catering just collapsed, sold out. Honestly, it really did. And it told us, people want this. People want somewhere where they can come. And it's exposing children, like from 6 months to the oldest pensioners. It's giving them a chance to share in something positive. And that positivity is culture and arts. And I suppose it's that sense of community. A step on from that, then we thought, we need to challenge this. This is nice and comfortable, but the people here don't have a voice. We need to give them a voice. So we started this, and it's relevant to Paris too. I like this. We started this other project called the 50 Arts and Social Club, and it was started in 2018, which marked the 50th anniversary of the Paris riots and the worldwide push for civil change. And what we thought was, we want this connect between the artist, the people that are involved in our team, but also the audience. And we themed each night, and like one may have been about art spending in the north, which is the lowest, I think, in Europe. It's something ridiculous, like £5.60 per person is spent on arts provision for people in the north. And we give people a voice and about a mechanism, and we informed them, educated them about how their voice could be heard. So it was a process of this. We talked about Brexit, we talked about sectarianism, we talked about religion in the city, you know, so we give this, and we built up this process whereby people felt, we call ourselves the Duncairn more than just an art centre. And it's about providing facilities, education, and empowering the community, and to bring out the very, very best that's in that community, because we know it's there. So we've done these, and on the back of that, we thought it was important. You know, one of the big buzzwords was impact. And we got some funding through an organisation called Esme Fairbairn over in England, who let us do some really, really important work into measuring the different levels of impact that our work was having on individuals within the community. And it completely blew our mind. And it showed that people who lived in social isolation, people with mental health problems, families like struggling just to get back, were all benefiting off this. And it informed us that we needed to listen much more to the community, so the community would guide what we done. We wouldn't foist this upon them. And I think that's essential, and I think that's essential for effective and strong culture to adapt. We must listen to what the people living in our community, what they would like to see, and what they think will help change their lives. So that's the approach we've taken. And even within our artistic programming this year, people said to us would like to see new young voices, artists on the edge, on the periphery of something, trying to break through. So we have an artist residency program where it's open-ended. We will support and give a free studio, bespoke, fitted out. One of our artists is a ceramicist, graduate from the Ulster University, and we have now supported her for 5 years, and now she's just ready to relocate. She's established a fantastic reputation, and the same for a young fashion designer we took out 5.5 years ago. So we don't do short-term residencies. It's about helping these people. We ask them, are you serious about your career? Yeah. It's about keeping the talent in the city and not losing it.
And it's about, like, in a community, like, you can't just put something, if you want to have an impact on that community,
yes.
just putting something on and then hoping people take something away from it and not following up achieves much less. But I wonder, you talked about the similarities with Paris there. I mean, Shropshire and North Belfast are kind of communities on the edge, but they're also close-knit communities in many ways. Paris obviously has many different types of communities, and you head an Irish cultural centre in another country. How do you go about creating a sense of community or identifying that idea of community in such a big city, such a diverse city, such a culturally diverse city, like both a community that you're obviously located in, but also an Irish community as well?
I suppose maybe just to start by saying that the Centre Culturel Irlandais was created in 2002, and it was a government decision to create this centre, not for the diaspora, but actually as a showcase for Irish arts. So just by saying that, you know, many of the art centres that we have abroad were actually set up by local communities for the local community. So the centre in Paris is very different. There's something very special about the centre. The fact that it's not in a new building, you know, it's almost 20 years old, but it's in a site that goes back, you know, it was bought by Irish priests in the late 18th century. So there's that heritage. Actually, now that I think of it, it'll tie in nicely with our last presentation, because Moncon was there in 2012, and he wrote a lovely quotation, if you don't mind me reading
please
it.
do, yeah.
A residency at the Centre Culturel Irlandais is such a rare gift, an acknowledgement that my country values the artistic work I do to the extent that they're willing to gift me with a period of time to devote myself entirely to my art in an elegant lay monastery that has been sheltering Irish people in Paris's Latin Quarter for 250 years. The sense of honour and responsibility one feels is potent. So you have this amazing centre, and you have a community of artists who live there, and it's a changing community. At the moment, we have 6 artists in residence. One of them is actually from Kerry, Brendan O'Beglock. It's a residency that was co-funded by Ali na Gaeltachta, so I was happy to see Rachel Halstead here. So we've 6 artists in residence, and what's really interesting is that artists who go, you know, you've got some who are very young, emerging artists. You've some, at the moment we've Liam O'Wanley with us as well. So you've some who are, you know, very well known in Ireland, but when they go, it's a real levelling experience, because they're kind of all in the same boat, you know. Yesterday, just as I was leaving, Liam came up to me and said, "Nora, is that yours?" And he had a small blue sock that he had found in his washing, and it was my son's sock. But those are the, you know, it's really nice. So there's a community there, there's a warmth, there's something special there, and that also attracts people. And so you've people, who are our audiences? So who are the people that we attract? So we've such a wide variety of events, and you certainly see people coming back. I normally say, you know, if people come once, they'll come back. It just happens. They come for that special atmosphere that's there. But you might have, our most successful event of the year takes place on the 21st of June. It's France's National Music Day. And over the course of one evening, we will have about, the minimum would be 5,000 people coming through. We've actually had 9,000 people coming to the centre over one evening. So those are people who might be coming for the first time, or they come because they love Ireland, or they're coming for the line-up. But we've really made a name for ourselves with that event. And I suppose, yeah, it's so you've people coming for different reasons. One thing that's quite interesting, unlike art centres in Ireland, the focus is, you know, in Ireland the focus is on audiences. So there are so many art centres around the country, but you're always having to take into account the audience. You're programming for the audience. Sometimes there are box office restrictions, and but other times as well, it's maybe challenging your audience, but you're always thinking of your audiences. With the Centre Culturel Irlandais, actually the starting point is the artist. It's how you can support the artist, less so about audiences. I mean, in terms of audience, the key people to bring in are actually programmers, because it's about creating further opportunities for the artist. That you know, whether it's an exhibition or a concert, that's not the end result. It's not just about that evening.
Building relationships.
It's about building relationships. Yeah. It's about building trust with local festivals and programmers, and ensuring that they see the work as well. There has to be a knock-on effect.
That's really interesting, because, Leisha, you live in a kind of a very notable edge place in Achill, along with Saoirse McHugh, who was
my neighbour.
Here earlier. The little Achill Massive going on this weekend.
Yeah.
And you're also the director of the Achill International Harp Festival. And I wonder, like, you come from Westport, so you have made, I don't know how long the journey metaphorically is to go from the mainland to an island. So I might ask you about that as an edge place, but also what's it like programming an event where you are bringing people from all over the world to come to the Harp Festival to a place on the edge that many people outside of Ireland would maybe never have heard of, and that again might be sort of an unexpected location for people coming from Paraguay or Venezuela or whatever to be coming to
absolutely.
Ireland. What is it like to, first of all, to live in a place like Achill, but what is it also like to program a cultural event there and bring people there?
Well, I suppose, first of all, it's like this. I mean, I was having the breakfast here this morning, looking at the beautiful thing. It was just like gorgeous. It reminded me that I live in such a beautiful place. I literally look south on Clare Island, and we can see Clare Island, Turk, Boffin, and Innishark on a good day. And it's majestic. I grew up also right on the water, halfway out to the Reek, Cropatrick, where the Owen comes out into the Clew Bay there. And so I wouldn't be able to live anywhere that was not by the sea, because of the nourishment I get from it. And I don't really analyse it too much, but generally speaking, if you go out of a morning at home and the gale force hits you in the wind and you have to hold on to the door of the car, that usually reminds me, that and the smell of the beautiful sea and the sound of it going to sleep, because I'm right on the water. I'm really privileged. So it definitely does, and it affects my music. And then as a programmer, I love going to festivals where, that's what I do for a living. I go to festivals and I have a wonderful, privileged life. But the ones that stay with you are the ones where you meet people. You actually meet the community, and I do an awful lot of teaching. You do often teach where you go. And I love that interaction. And I also love interaction where I don't just get to go and do my bit or do my duo with whoever I'm going, or the band. I love having to say, somebody says to you, will you play with the fiddle player tonight? He's from something. I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. And you take, half an hour, whatever it is, or you've pre-organised it with emails, about material, what to play. And they're the most rewarding as an artist. So that's a big part of our whole thing in Achill at the Harp Festival. And initially we were going to call it the Achill Harp Festival, Féile Cruite Achla. But there's so much in Achill. It's already a huge cultural, historical place, and still Lána Teanga, culture. So there's. It was already established. The Scoil Achla has been established in 1910, and it was revived by John Twyn McNamara in 1985. So there was a huge, audience there to build up on, and also this mad connection with Scotland, with people emigrating and going to Scotland, Tottyhoken, and that really affects all our psyche where we are. And for me as well, growing up, the journey on the train from Westport down to Achill and the history there, and that the bagpipes were brought into Achill, and we have 5 pipe bands on the island. It's extraordinary, and I absolutely love the pipes, and I've really grown to love them and incorporate
Something
them.
very prominent here in Dingle as well.
Yeah. Harp and pipes, bagpipes and harp, yeah. But there's with the program, back to the program thing. But I wanted to get all of it in, so I wanted to have a festival that's more like a community thing, that people feel part of it and feel like, oh, that's us. That's us on stage. Let's put because our bagpipers are phenomenal. The standard piping is really amazing, but they usually play just in the pipe band. So I was trying to extract a few of them and give them a set of pipes that are in A, which means they can tune, they can play in the same key as the rest of us, and put on big shows. So we've done that every year. Invited like the Scottish the first year, we had Shrahil and Achla, and then we had Bretons the second year, and each time bringing the local bagpipes to tie in with us, and then obviously a great harp player, and then last year Galicia, and you can see the knock on because these musicians have gone into the school during the week in the run up to it, and the kids are playing Galician tunes or Breton stuff, and they know, and each time, depending on where they're coming from, the school will deal with it in the geography class or the history class, or it's amazing. And then every year we pick another South American country, because the harp is all over South America. It would have gone across in the 1500s with the Jesuits. It's a phenomenal story that's not told as well. So like when you go to Paraguay, they have the harp as their national instrument. So I was lucky to go there one time on a trip, and they had the World Harp Festival, and they want to take over, by the way. It's just so I was over representing, sorting them out, don't worry. And
industrial espionage to knock off the Paraguayan harp sector before it gets going.
But the whole of South America, each of them have obviously their own different flavour. If you think about the different music from here, from Kerry, the traditional music here, and Connemara, Mayo, Donegal, the difference in our music is so huge, really, in ways that you can imagine that similarity and difference it is in South America. So we've had the Paraguayan, the Colombian, the Venezuelan. The Venezuelans were a huge hit last year, and it was amazing. But to walk into that last year, just really briefly, I remember seeing this YouTube with these Venezuelan bands. They're absolutely amazing. They're called Compasses. You should look them up. They're amazing. And I said, right, come on. And the lads all loved it. I loved the YouTube. We were like, right, let's try and get them. So then we were walked in, didn't realise we were walking into visas. And, oh, my God, the red tape was horrendous. And in the meantime, poor Venezuela was going through what it's going through, which was just super difficult. But then, once they were up on stage and they played, the whole of the sunshine from South America came to Achill. It was phenomenal. It was just... So what's left people with is, you can't put a value on it. You can't even measure it.
And there's something amazing about like Venezuelans playing harp music in Achill or
and a fact that it wasn't wasted on them too. They would say they're happy to come to the country of the harp,
Yeah, and traditional music happening in Presbyterian churches in North Belfast, or theatre travelling around parts of Shropshire that don't only have one cultural event a year, or 57 countries working together in cultural missions in Paris. There's something really interesting there about the title of the panel, about bringing it back home, like the connections between places that might at first seem very remote and other places that also might seem remote or might also be centres or whatever, and the kind of the circle of culture that brings people together, and that it's not something that is static but something that is vibrant. Made me think about something that you said earlier, Sophie, about your journey about going back to Shropshire, and you said that you weren't sure whether you would stay. Do you think that you feel a need to move like that culturally, or do you think that maybe you could be convinced to stay, or do you think that this, what are your thoughts on going away and coming home, which is something that many Irish people and many Irish artists, go through in their lives in various different ways as well?
I think it's about cultural confusion in a lot of ways. I suppose my personal journey is a weird one in that, I moved to Ireland when I was 17, and then I moved back 2 years ago. So all my adult life, I lived in Ireland. So I sort of, in a way, I feel like I culturally identify as Irish a lot more than I do as English. Plus, all my holidays were to here, to Tralee, in fact. But
as a Tralee man, I can only applaud.
There you are. But
woman of great taste.
I think maybe I sort of feel like maybe I was born in the wrong place, and I found home, and then I left home to go back to the place I was born. So it's a real sense of cultural confusion, but also this weird objective view of being from where you're from. When I was living in Ireland, I had a very odd objective view of being English. I've just been through the 2-year mourning period for Ireland. I no longer sob when the plane leaves or comes down. Not that we should be on airplanes.
2 years.
I get the ferry regularly, but it's actually much more fun getting the ferry because I can get a direct train from Shropshire to Holyhead. But that's a whole other story. But I think thinking about one of the tiny little places that we've been making a project in is in West Cumbria, and it's a community that has no access to culture, really at all. But there's one artist called Sheila Fell, and this is what sort of keeps coming back into my head. She said that the world is made up of a sum of its parts, and all its parts are local. And I think maybe that does tie it in a sort of a way, because it's exactly the same as the reason you've got harp music in Achill and Venezuela. It's like the strength of localism is what creates something global. And within that, does that enable you to choose how you culturally identify because you're identifying with the local. I don't know. It's not a completely.
I think that you're right. There is something that is like, because I have spent many years living out of Kerry, 15 years since I lived at home, but I've spent a number of months here over the last while in the care of Kerry General Hospital. If there are any staff here, thank you all very much I broke my wrist over the summer and had an enforced stay back at home. And it was surprising to me how quickly I fell back into being at home, even though it had been so long since I lived here. There is a kind of a pull that can be very powerful, even if you don't necessarily feel it. I mean, I noticed, Nora, when you were appointed in Paris, I saw that the headline in the Fermanagh paper, the impartial reporter, was Enniskillen woman with most glamorous job in France. Which I thought was a classic Irish headline of how it doesn't matter where you end up, she's still Enniskillen woman. And I think that what you said, Sophie, about the relationship of the local and the global is exactly what we've been discussing, and it's exactly what ties all of this together, because it is the two things exist in a symbiosis culturally that is impossible to separate, and that you can't have culture that doesn't deal with the outside, and you also can't have culture that doesn't deal with where it's from. So it's been so wonderful to discuss all of this with you, and we have a special treat because our fifth panellist is going to collaborate with Leisha to play. So you will have the privilege of hearing the new Musician of the Year performing for you.
No pressure.
No pressure, exactly, yeah.
Not too bad, tuning-wise. Normally, if you're in India now, you'd be taken into the 20-minute tuning. So I could play... I better do some little harpy thing first anyway. This is it's actually from Turlough O'Carolan, who was born in 60-70. He should be our national composer. Absolutely amazing tunes we have from that. He was a bit of a rogue, and we have such fantastic lore from him and stories. But he basically went around the country with his harp, falling in love with the women he met and composing for them. I don't know how it went down with the man of the house in these places, but this particular one is Mabel Kelly, and then I'll go into a couple of polkas, because when in Rome, better. Yes, the first one is John Kelly's. The second one is from home. It's actually a Mayo polka. We do have polkas in Mayo, and then the last one is a Dingle polka from the Goodman collection. So.
Absolutely fantastic. I'm trying to pressure her into giving us a brief encore as well.
No,
but
no,
I'm
go
not
on,
sure.
go on, go on, go on.
She digresses. But thank you so much, Leisha.
Welcome, you're welcome.
It's
Thank
been
you, everybody.
absolutely a great honour to hear you play, but it's also been fantastic to talk with the four of you this afternoon about your amazing variety of work and the diversity of things that you're involved in, and to be able to bring people here in the way that all of you have also brought people, just like Other Voices in Ireland's Edge does, bring people together in unusual places in ways that people might not necessarily expect. Those are the kind of events that are most inspiring and that build the most kind of important relationships. And I hope that listening to the four of you has given people some kind of an insight into all the thought and planning and everything that goes on behind the scenes to make those sort of things happen. And the next time that you go to your local arts centre or to a festival or whatever, you'll think, I wonder what was the thinking behind all of this to bring together. So thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for listening to us.